G'day guys, how you going? Today I want to talk to you about how I pick up a lead and or a ribbon of gold in a creek. I'm in central west New South Wales and this is a creek that I come to very frequently. I've picked up some really good gold out of this creek. In fact, I've done test pans in this creek where I've got up to well over 80 to 90 shades of colour per pan. And when you get in that sort of concentration, the only way to dig is down until you hit the bedrock. Now the reason I've picked this area here, I always come back to this area, is because you've got a creek out to the left and you've got the main creek to the right, and right here where I am forms the junction. So you've got two areas that are coming into one, and there's gold coming from both areas. So what I've done down here is I've cut a trench just below the junction point, and at the moment it's probably only about 2 meters long, and I'm taking samples. Now if you have a look here, right down here is clay bed, and this is the actual bedrock in this part of the world, and it's a clay bed. So what I've done is I've just taken a small scraping from that section, and then further along towards where it deepens, I've taken a scraping there. Now I pan that section there out and I've got 1 speck. I pan that section out and I've got 18 specks. I'm going to take another sample down there, and I suspect that I'll have a lot more colour in the next sample. So systematically I'm going to take samples the whole length of the trench. And then I'll simply then cut a trench following that lead or that ribbon. I want to show you guys how I take my next sample and how I get to the bedrock in the first place. Now, in this creek, it is very, very specific. The gold is literally in the last ½ an inch sitting on the bedrock. So you can see how much I've taken out. I've taken out probably about 30 to 40, maybe 50 buckets of overburden, because there is barely any gold in it. To get a true sample, you need to take the stuff that's sitting on the bedrock. You don't want any other materials to give you a false reading. So I'm going to take a sample out of this area here, around about the same distance between those two samples. So around about here, and to do that, I use a little scraping tool which I've made, and if it's loose like this, I get rid of it. And you've got to be actually pretty ruthless. You've got to be ruthless. You can't afford to be picking up lots and lots of overburden, because number one, you're going to get a false reading, and number two, you'll be carrying a full bucket of dirt instead of, by the time I take this sample, probably around about 3 or 4 cup loads. Now I don't want to be panning off a full bucket of dirt. I just want to be taking the minimal amount to get the reading that I need. So you got to get in there and you got to sort of put a little bit of pressure on your scraping tool, but not too much, because you don't want to actually scratch down onto the bedrock, but enough to move the stuff that's just sitting there loosely. Now most gold, when a river is in flood or a creek's in flood, will head straight to the bottom, and all the overburden and the churning and all the activity that's happening above will force it all down to the bottom, and it'll stay there if there's clay or bedrock. And you can see I'm now getting down into it, and I've already just removed another good inch. And yes, I know what's probably going through your mind. You're probably thinking, wow, well, he's probably throwing some gold out. Well, look, if I am, it'd be very, very minimal. Very, very minimal. So you can see how much dirt there still is there before I can get down to the bedrock. And you got to do it. You have to do it, because if you don't, you're just going to waste time, a lot of time, panning dirt that's got nothing in it. And I'm all about economy for effort. When it comes to prospecting, it's all about getting the best results, the greatest results for the least amount of work. I mean, don't get me wrong, you've got to do work. I mean, I've had to do a fair bit of work this morning to get rid of all this overburden in the first place. But you've got to get right down to it, and if I poke this now, there's the bedrock, and there's that mallow. There it is there. That really red, rich stuff, and that's what's holding the gold. That's exactly where the gold is. So now it's time for me to take my sample. Okay, so I've taken my third sample, and I just want to point something out. The first sample up here, the gold-bearing gravel, probably around about 4 to 5 mil thick. Second sample, about 4 to 5 mil thick, and then it moves down to around about ½ an inch. If you look at this third sample, the gold-bearing gravel here is around about 1 inch wide. So the mallow, all that really good gear, that's about 1 inch thick. And down on the other side, it's getting down to about 1.5 inches, which stands to reason because it's down in a lower section and it's more towards the centre of the flow. So remembering now that this one had 18 shows of colour, so I'd imagine this is going to have a lot more, simply because of the thickness of the mallow. I'm going to go and find out. There's the first test sample there. Took the second sample from there, and took the third sample from there. I got 1 speck there. I got around about 20 specks there, and I got 60 shows of colour out of this sample here. So it's definitely moving towards the inside of the bend, and the mallow, as I said before, here is a good 1.5 inches thick. So my next sample will be around about over here. So that's how I find where the richest lead is running in a creek. Anyway, I'm going to start digging the next sample. So I've dug my fourth sample down the bottom, and it pretty well looks like the bedrock is starting to lift up from there. So that's where she basins out. Now here's the most remarkable thing. Out of that fourth sample, which appears to be the basin of the creek, or where it's just starting to lift up, I got 1 speck. Out of that sample there, I got 60 specks. The one before that, 20, and the one before that, 1. So between this one here, 20 shows of colour, and 60 shows of colour, that seems to be where the richest part of the creek is. The question is, of course, where did it pinch out? My sample on the third sample came up to here, and it's only maybe 6, 7, 8 inches from that edge to the edge of the fourth sample, where I got 1 speck. So this middle ground in between probably isn't carrying much gold at all. In fact, it may have pinched out halfway along this sample. One fact does remain though, between the top edge of the third sample and the bottom edge of the second sample is really good colour. So now what I need to do is I need to move out to the side and test to see where the actual edges of the lead are, and I'll do that now. I've taken around about 7 or 8 samples. The end state is from the top of this area here down to here. I've got 20 shows of colour to the pan. Down here I've got 60 shows to the pan. Then across here I've got 50 shows to the pan. Then up in the centre, surprisingly, it was lower. So there could be 2 leads, 2 little ribbons running here. And if they converge, then that should be quite a little rich concentration area. Where my foot is, below that area, 7 shows to the pan. Not even worth it. So pretty well from here up to there, to that area there, that's my band. So roughly around about 2.5 feet wide. Now I've got to go either upstream or downstream and just continue to follow it. What I've done now is I've paddocked or picked up 1 square metre of the last inch. This corner here, I've taken another sample just in this little tiny corner, and I got a good 30 to 35 shades of colour in one pan. So that says I'm still on it and I'm still following it. So that's really good news. So I'm going to continue pushing further downstream.